This is a patch I paid $30 for, one of many. Let me show you a close-up of it. And after I paid $30 for this, I decided I was going to learn to do it myself and see if I couldn't do a better job. And this was done by professionals, and I can show you what I've learned, and you can judge for yourself if it's worth doing yourself. We had to add a new breaker for the laundry area, some bigger wires, and you can see how we had to do this. Had to run them quite a ways, and it entailed cutting a couple holes through the gypsum, the sheetrock. And let me show you some ways to close that up, some tricks to close that up that will leave it looking as good as new. One trick is when you cut out the hole, if you can cut it along a lath, that really helps. Here we missed one, so we may have to add something back to keep the edges in line with each other. But on these two sides, not. That will really help. And I have another video where I show how to use the magnet to detect where these metal ones are anyway. And the wood ones you can detect with magnets. If you're looking for the nails or the screws, you can click onto them and outline them. So, okay, that's the first thing, is to make sure you have a lath or something to help hold the edges square to each other. Otherwise they'll slip down and you'll see this crack or uneven space along the edges. The way you make this look perfect is you got to make sure that the joint isn't sticking up, and that's probably the number one thing. So what I'm going to do, I've already started here, is you want to just make a line that's about half the width of the tape you're going to use. And what we're going to do is we're just going to barely cut through the surface and peel away the paper. Now you can't really see it on camera, but there's a little ridge right here. So I'm just peeling away the paper. Don't cut too deep. You'll weaken the gypsum layer and that won't be good. But you just want to get the paper off. You notice I need to continue down here and peel off, but go all the way around. Now I've just removed the part of the paper layer. See that? A little bit into the gypsum here, but I'm leaving about half the paper. And so, yeah, that's it. Just slice down deep enough here, and then get your knife underneath the edge of it, scrape along like this, and the paper will lift off in a nice strip like that. Again, not too deep. Don't worry about getting all the paper off. You just want a ridge along here that's about the same depth as your tape. The hardest part is staying out of the way of the camera. So I've just sliced this and going along like this. Oops, too deep, too deep, too deep. There we go. Yep. It's easy down here on the floor, but up in the air, a little tougher. The tricky bit is we need to do exactly the same thing around that hole. So just about half the width of your tape, a little bit more, go around there and remove just the paper. Don't get too deep, just the paper. So yeah, that'll be the next step in this. Almost done up here. Got a little too deep in spots. You can see the gypsum over here, a lot of spots. But anyway, you don't have to go that deep. You don't have to peel all the paper off. So that's that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to screw that other piece back up in here. Then we'll start putting in the plaster. One layer of plaster, thin layer of plaster. We'll lay the tape, and then we'll plaster over it, do the sanding. So at that point it's pretty normal, but the trick here is to make sure we have a little trough, if you will, to lay that tape in, so that when we're done, it's perfectly smooth. You'll notice on this front edge I got nothing to screw into, none of the lath. So you can either add a small piece of lath, use a piece of wood, anything to tie this edge with the edge of the piece we just worked on, because one of the things that will really show is if the two edges don't line up. So yeah, that's one trick, is you got to get something in there. And again, you can use a small piece of wood, a piece of lath, whatever you have, and just screw it up underneath there, and then put the next piece on, put the closing piece on, and then just screw into that. And just to be different, I used a piece of wood. Screwed it in there. Screws won't show because they're in the taping zone. So just make sure I don't get any bulges there, that's all. And that's it. And then again, when I put the piece in here, I'll screw into here, and that'll hold this edge and this edge together. So here we are. I have it screwed up in there. The edges are level with each other. You're going to ask why I got such big cracks along the side, and that's because I cut into the same place somebody else had cut into before me. So the plaster fell out. Yeah, I could replace the whole piece of gypsum, but this house is old enough. I found that the new gypsum is a little bit thinner than the old, and so you'll get an obvious low spot in the ceiling. So if I can, I always try to use the same old piece, and we'll see. I think this will go. Okay, so there we are. Next step is to lay in some joint compound, some plaster and tape, and do all that good stuff. I've got my joint filled, got my tape cut to the right length, which is important because when you're working you don't want to mess around with it. So I've got all my tapes cut. There they are sitting there. And yeah, I'm going to put my joint plaster in there. I had to put in a lot obviously because of the big crack. And then I'll lay the tape in there, and then I'll run another layer over it. One of the things you want to avoid is leaving a lot of plaster along the edges. You say, oh, I'll go back and sand it off later. No, that's a miserable job sanding over your head. So you want to make sure you get it as flush as possible and not leave a lot of stuff on there and tell yourself you're going to come back and sand it off. Just don't do that. So get it right while it's wet. It's much easier to work with. And anyway, that's what I'm about to do. So I got this one in. Got this one in over here. I got a couple strings loose over here, but I know not to pull those strings while the plaster's wet. You'll pull your tape down with it. So, okay, that's, you can't see it on the camera, but it's still recessed. It's not flush with the rest of the ceiling yet. So that's my first layer on the left and right sides, and I'm out of plaster. So I need to go down and make some more. Okay, got the tape on there, got the first layer of plaster on there, and that's one of the secrets is don't rush it, don't try to do it all in one layer if you're not good enough, and I'm not good enough. I'm an amateur, so I got my tape up, I'm going to let it dry. One mistake is to get up there and start trying to put on the next coat and the next coat while it's still wet. You pull the tape loose and you end up with a mess. So, and I did, I nicked one corner and pulled it loose up there. So, nah, I don't want to do any more of that. Okay, so let it dry and I'll be back and we'll put on the next layer. Here we are, we've got the tape in all the way around. Got some holes to plug in the back there and a little one over there on that side. And let's take a close-up and I'll show you some things to watch out for. You see these lighter spots back here? This is gypsum, and I was a little bit sloppy and I let it out there, and what will happen is as you're scraping along here trying to get it flat, if you have a high spot it'll go like this and you'll end up with a nice lump right in your seam that you'll have to sand out. So you want to make sure to go along here and sand off all this stuff, make sure it's nice and flat on both sides of the seam. You can see the seam pretty clearly right here. It's there's the edge of the paper and there's the edge of the paper. So you want to make sure that this white stuff is gone, get it flat so that when you're running your applicator, whatever you're using, along here that it's not rocking back and forth like this and creating ripples and waves and bumps in your seam. And that'll save you a lot of sanding in the future. So again, I need to take this and this off of here and kind of on both sides. So yeah, I got a little sloppy. I should have scraped it off when I was applying it on both sides like this. You don't really want to scrape along like this very much to try to remove stuff when it's still wet, because you'll pull your tape right out of there. So you can go along afterwards and scrape it out of there like that. Okay, so let me go do some sanding and reapplication of the next coat, and we'll go from there. And I use a piece of wood to keep the sandpaper flat. You want to make sure that the wood is long enough such that when you go back and forth across the seam, that you still have wood on both sides of the seam so that it's not dipping down, otherwise you'll form a dip. You want to have like a bridge. You want to have the wood act like a bridge across the gap so that it will remain flat in relation to both sides of the seam that you've made. Also, be sure to cover up stuff that's important before you go sanding. This is a computer and TV over there, because this dust is really fine. It's also not good for your lungs, so you want to wear a mask and all that stuff. And you want to minimize sanding, but sanding is one of the necessary steps, so keep that in mind. We've just finished the first layer on there, the first tape, and as you can see, it's already becoming relatively invisible. And anyway, let's go get a close-up and take a look at the next steps. So as you get near your final coating and sanding, you want to make sure you fill in any divots like this. You notice I cut this pretty flat back in here, but I've got a little divot right here I need to take care of. So any divots like that, fill them in and sand it smooth. And then the next step is we paint it. And I'm going to use a little bit of texture to the paint so it'll help cover up any seam. But what you're seeing right here is the edge of the paper, the old edge of the paper, and a little bit of discoloration from the old, the new plaster absorbing color from the old. So, but that's it. Right across here is really flat, really good. Again, take care of that divot and should look like new. Okay, on to the next. So there it is over there. It's just got one coat of paint on it. Haven't used a roller, so there's no texture on it yet. The paint's still wet, but let's go have a look. There's the spot right up in there. Not too terrible, not my best job, but okay. And this was step one in our solar on-grid project, so yeah, there'll be more on that to follow. Okay, well, hope you found it useful and interesting.